Ready. Jack Killian. Hey, ladies and gentlemen, give it up for Jack Killian right here in the front row, holding it down. Yeah, Jack, dude, high five. Every year I see young Jack and his sister Lucy absorbing every one of these shows, right, Jack? Learning so much about the way of life for climbing, problem solving, community building, volunteer stewardship. How is your Facelift 2022 going? 19th annual, by the way. How is it going? Come on. Really, what's wrong with it? How's it going? Come on! Yes! Yes, yes, excellent, excellent. Okay, so we are live streaming this to Elon Musk on Mars right now. Jim Painter, what are we looking at online to be able to send this out to everybody? Jim? Is Jim there? We're going to get that for you later. But first, a note from our sponsors. Thank you, the North Face, Cliff Bar, Patagonia. Royal Robbins, Tioga Sequoia Brewing. Tioga Sequoia Brewing in the house tonight. We love these guys. Yeah, Michael and team back there. Yeah, Maddie, bringing it up. Touchstone Climbing was sending there recently, last Thursday. Where's Misia Serafino and Lucho? Lucho, where are you, my friend? Yeah, there you are, friends. That's it, friends of the touching of the stone. Also, our friends at Arc'teryx, Jordan Cannon will be up here tonight. Toad & Co. Is Sarah Palladino in the audience yet? She will be. And then Koros Wearables. I'm wearing my wearable right now. Thank you, Shelby. And then many more. We'll be going over those because we have a long list of people that love what we're doing here at the Yosemite Climbing Association. My name is Timmy O'Neill. I'll be your MC tonight and for the rest of your lives if you're lucky. Okay. So first up, we bring you stories of archaeology. I know you're thinking Indiana Jones, and it's very similar. The bullwhip, the pistol, the hat. Right, Aaron? We're doing this. So we have Aaron Garrity, who has been working with the National Park Service in archaeology here within Yosemite for the last 6-7 months, but has a history of working in public lands. And we're going to be learning about archaeology and historical middens and refuse. Please make some Yosemite love there, bringing those two hands together for Aaron Garrity. Come on up here, Aaron. Ooh, 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 ooh. Thank you, Aaron. Yeah, trash
All
talking.
Right. Good evening, everyone. Hi. So I am one of the archaeologists at the park, and tonight I'm going to talk a little bit about some archaeological principles and how those inform the history of refuse disposal within Yosemite. Okay. So this is an overview of the presentation I'm going to give tonight. I'm going to begin by providing a broad outline of archaeology at the park, so you just have kind of the broad strokes of what we know about the history of humans living here in this area. Then I'm going to briefly describe the laws that govern cultural resources and protect archaeological sites on federal land. From there, I'm going to describe a bit about how archaeological sites are formed and the importance of context for archaeologists. And then I will use Yosemite as an example to discuss the history of refuse at the park, the types of information we can learn from refuse, and the evolution of refuse disposal at the park. All right, so archaeologists have evidence that people were hunting in the Yosemite region nearly 10,000 years ago. That date could be pushed back further. This time period is pretty difficult to see archaeologically because people were pretty nomadic, moving around a lot on the landscape, not leaving a big footprint. But we usually identify this time period through either controlled excavation using dating techniques or through characteristic projectile points. So people in this area at this time would have been nomadic hunters and gatherers, and they would have been using atlatls for hunting. So if you aren't familiar with what an atlatl is, the image on the screen shows how that would work. So if you've ever used a chuck-it to throw a tennis ball to a dog, it's kind of the same idea. And then, so between about 8,000 and 4,000 years ago, there's less evidence of human presence here in this area. Archaeologists have suggested that during this time period, people may have been moving down into the Central Valley area where there was vast wetlands, lots more resources at that time. So we don't have a lot of evidence of people in this area between that time period. And then between 4,000 and 1,500 years ago, temperatures cooled, and there's evidence of groups moving in greater numbers into this area. During this period, people began to have heavier reliance on seed foods, and we also see pretty wide-ranging trade networks. So we get, from the west, we see shell coming in from the coastal areas. From the east, we see obsidian. So there's no natural obsidian sources within the park. So that we know here when we see obsidian, we know that we're looking at an archaeological site. So yeah, broad trade networks. And really from this point forward, we know that humans have been living in here continuously. Later in time, hunting technology changed from the use of spear points and atlatls to the use of bows and arrows. So we see that archaeologically, the projectile points get smaller over time. And by at least 1,500 years ago, we see that people began processing acorn as a staple food. So in the park, you might see that now on granite outcrops, on boulders. If you see rounded, kind of smooth areas, sometimes they'll have sort of deep depressions. They can kind of be flatter areas too. And so these are people using those rocks to grind acorn, probably some seeds. We know people were processing things like fish on these. So basically the same idea as like a mortar and pestle. Or the flatter ones would be what we call a mono, so holding a stone in your hand and grinding this way. During this time, we also continue to see a lot of trade networks back and forth. So we still see obsidian coming in from the east, shell from the west, and we also see other materials, salt, pine nuts, acorns, sage, all of these types of things were being traded. Between about 800 and 150 years ago, people continued to live increasingly sedentary lifestyles, and we know that by at least this time period, people started managing the landscape using fire. So using fire to manage for specific plants, things like black oak, willow, grasses, those kinds of things. Also during this time period, we see a lot of pictographs or painted images on rocks. Yeah, pretty characteristic for this time period. So the California Gold Rush of 1849 really changed the life patterns for Native Americans living here pretty much forever. By that time period, populations were already starting to be decimated by European diseases, and then influx of miners and traders led to conflicts with the Native Americans living here. So those conflicts were over land and resources. And because of that, the Mariposa Battalion campaign was launched in 1851 with the goal of removing Native Americans from Yosemite. So from this time on, Euro-American settlers quickly began to move into the area, and we see lots of different use of the land. So miners, sheep herders, ranchers, homesteaders all started to lay claim to the land. In 1864, the federal government granted the Yosemite Valley and the Mariposa Grove of Big Trees to the state of California for public use and recreation. And then Yosemite National Park was established in 1890. Then in 1906, that original state reserve was then ceded back to the federal government for the National Park Service to manage. So at that point, we start to see hotels and dining facilities, things like that. So this ushered in this tradition of tourism that we see today. And then in 1891, the U.S. Army cavalry troops were assigned to Yosemite to protect the resources from sheep herders, cattle stockmen, poaching, fire, all of these kinds of things. They continued to administer the park until 1913. And this is where we have African-American buffalo soldiers were among the cavalry that were some of the first rangers in the park. Railroads and logging operations forged pathways throughout the landscape. Italian and Chinese laborers built roads into the Yosemite Valley. And so how we see this archaeologically across the landscape, we see remains of early homesteads, mining and logging operations, activities from tourism and National Park Service activities, and then remnants of all of those kinds of activities. So today, we have 7 Native American tribes that have cultural connections to this area. The archaeological sites, the resources, the places within the park, they're all tangible ancestral connections to these groups, and the park actively consults and collaborates with these 7 tribes. So I'm not going to spend a whole lot of time talking about laws, but it is important to mention that we do have a legal obligation to protect cultural resources on federal lands. So when I say cultural resources, I'm talking about archaeological sites, historic buildings, trails, historic landscapes, and places that have significance to the tribes. In the United States, anything older than 50 years old is considered historic and can be significant pieces of our collective history. Federal and state laws protect archaeological site location information to prevent unauthorized collection, vandalism, or other human-caused disturbances. So the first congressional act that was passed to protect cultural resources on public lands was the American Antiquities Act in 1906. This is the same law that allows the president to designate national monuments, historic sites, those kinds of things. Let's see, another important cultural resource law is the Historic Sites Act. So what this did was to institute preservation of historic resources as a national value. And then in 1966, the National Historic Preservation Act was passed, and this is a really important one for us working for the Park Service because it directs us to survey and manage cultural resources. So survey, so we know what's out there, so that we then know how to manage cultural resources on federal laws. And then it also tells us that we need to consider and take into account the impacts that our projects, that the things that we're doing, to see what those impacts are going to be to cultural resources too. And then the next one, so because the Antiquities Act, which passed in 1906, the goal was to prohibit damage to archaeological site, collection, vandalism, all of those things. You couldn't excavate at an archaeological site without a permit. That was the goal for the Antiquities Act, but it was found that they couldn't enforce it in court. So in 1979, the Archaeological Resources Protection Act, or ARPA, was passed, and that's now the mechanism that we use to prosecute those types of things: archaeological looting, trafficking, vandalism. And then the last one I'll touch on is the Native American Graves Protection and Repatriation Act that was passed in 1990. This protects Native American graves and funerary objects. It also protects objects that are necessary for a tribe to maintain their cultural traditions. So that's just a quick overview of the legal obligations that we have to protect cultural resources. And now I'm going to move on to discussing how protecting cultural resources, in this case I'm going to specifically talk about archaeological sites, how that also protects the information that we can learn from archaeological sites. So you might not be able to read the text on these images, but I have these images here because they provide good examples of what we refer to as archaeological site formation processes. So formation processes are the events that affect how sites of human activity came to be buried and what happened to them afterwards. So you can see here that after humans leave a place, natural forces begin to act upon a site. So these forces can include vegetation growth, rodent and insect movement, freeze-thaw, water movement, gravitational forces, wind and water erosion, all of these things. So all of these forces acting on the site, over time the materials begin to weaken and deteriorate. This is especially true of organic materials, which typically don't preserve very well at archaeological sites. And then in addition to natural forces, human activity can also shape archaeological sites. So examples of human activity that affects the archaeological record include recycling, reshaping, or reuse of sites and artifacts, preservation of heirloom objects, and the deliberate or accidental destruction of archaeological sites in later periods. So this is a graphical representation that shows the processes that disturb the distribution of artifacts at a site after it's been buried. So these processes can include erosion of surface soil, redistribution downslope of sediments and artifacts, subsurface movement of soils, upward displacement of sediments and artifacts, water movement, disturbance of surface and buried artifacts by tree fall or decay. So lots of different things happen to deteriorate a site, and then after it's buried, to continue to shape what we see. So I hope these images demonstrate that there's complex interactions that deteriorate and bury sites and continue to shape them. So as archaeologists, we try to identify these forces and piece together how formation processes have acted upon a site. Because we are examining how materials at an archaeological site have ended up in their particular location, their context is extremely important. So context is the position and association of an artifact, feature, or something at an archaeological site in space and time. So context is the relationship that artifacts have to each other and to their surroundings. So yeah, it really places something within that time-space continuum. Removal of artifacts from their location destroys essential information that is needed to understand who is at a site and how they lived. So for example, if we just have one object that's been removed from its context, we might be able to tell some things about that artifact. We might be able to know when it was made, maybe where it was made, maybe its function. But an object in context, we might be able to know a whole lot more. So we might be able to see a date range for human activity at a site, the types of activities present at a site, change over time, what kind of patterns we see, information about the type of environment that's at the site. Sometimes we can know things about identity and ethnicity, possibly socioeconomic status, how the site itself was formed, and on and on. So basically, if you've ever heard an archaeologist kind of harp on about leaving objects in place, context is why. Okay, so we'll move into talking a little bit about Yosemite specifically. So now that we know how archaeological sites are formed and why context is important for a deeper understanding of human activity, we'll look at the history of refuse disposal at the park and what we've learned from that historic refuse areas here. So the timeline on the screen shows that pretty early on in the park's history, at least as a national park unit, in the 1890s into the early 1900s, garbage definitely became a consideration for the park. And so some of these pieces on the timeline here we'll revisit a little bit later on. So as an effort to assess environmental impacts of waste accumulation areas in the parks, we've been able to study various historic refuse areas, allowing us to make some conclusions about the history of refuse disposal here. Examining artifacts at historic waste accumulation areas has allowed us to make some conclusion about who used the area, when it was used, for how long, the types of activities that are represented, and where the objects are coming from. So for example, the array of artifacts and depth of deposits present at the Curry Village historic waste accumulation area supports our knowledge that this area served as Yosemite Valley's main dump for over 30 years. By analyzing artifacts from various waste accumulation areas in the park, it's easy to confirm that tourism in Yosemite was an important element of the economy here. We see that single-serving containers, objects related to personal grooming, and structural remains at High Sierra camps demonstrate a desire for comfort and convenience in the backcountry. Objects such as Awani Hotel ceramics demonstrate a desire for luxury within the park. And so basically our waste accumulation areas reveal the park's ability to encourage visitation while also providing material conveniences. Yeah, definitely can't see all of these here, but basically by analyzing waste accumulation areas, we can have some information about the types of products, brands, manufacturers, functions, and time periods that are represented in these waste accumulation areas. So the examples on the screen show that the Curry Village waste accumulation area contains refuse from a wide array of manufacturers. So these are all represented on the right here, different artifacts manufactured from different places. And then on the left, you can see that represents a lot of different artifact types over kind of a long time span. Another insight that's evident through analysis of waste accumulation areas is that tourism has increased over time, which we know through written sources, but we can also see that on the ground. So, for example, the volume of 1950s and 1960s trash in the Curry waste accumulation area far exceeds the trash from the 1930s and the 1940s. Refuse observed at other waste accumulation areas demonstrate that refuse dates to predominantly or exclusively to the 1960s and 1970s. So this increase in trash over time, that follows a well-documented increase that we see of tourism over time. But then also in addition to larger numbers of visitors at the park, the increase in amount of trash over time is a reflection of things like the reduction of bulk items, the growth in the packaging industry in the 1950s and 60s, and increasing use of disposable single-use items. So as greater numbers of people began traveling to the Yosemite Valley in the 1890s and early 1900s, park managers quickly realized that tourists needed somewhere to put their trash. As in concentrated areas, bears quickly figured out that they could go to the dump sites and eat visitors' food scraps, similar to what they do today. In 1923, the concessionaire for the park saw this, and then they realized that they could make some money off of this. So what they did was they set up bleachers, they bussed people in to these dump areas, and the bears came in, and people watched the bears eat this trash. So this obviously began to pose safety risks to both humans and to bears, and it also conditioned the bears to eating human food. So the park ended the bear feeding shows in the 1940s and closed the last artificial feeding area in 1971. Another historic era practice included burning trash. An incinerator was built in the park in 1924 to reduce the volume of trash. And the park also used a can crusher, which was reportedly installed in the 1920s to save dump space. So we see cubes of crushed cans at the Curry Village waste accumulation area, and in later deposits at the El Capitan waste accumulation area. Collectively, the waste accumulation areas in the park, dating from the 1930s into the 1970s, reflect a larger pattern within U.S. society, namely the idea that environmental degradation was a necessary and therefore justifiable cost of development and progress. So even though waste accumulation areas were smelly and unsightly, they were undeniable consequences of humans living in and visiting Yosemite with also being able to have modern conveniences. As much as possible, we see that the dumps were located in places that could be considered out of the way. But as tourism continued to increase, we also see that the areas that actually could be considered out of the way diminished. So at the same time, by the middle of the 20th century, perceptions of trash in natural areas began to change. Environmental studies began to demonstrate that the dumping of garbage can impact the environment. Additionally, efforts such as Keep America Beautiful campaigns that were begun in the 1950s, anti-litter efforts began in the 1960s, were part of an emerging environmental ethic in which trash dumps and litter in outdoor areas became less acceptable. Dumpsters and dump trucks first appeared in Yosemite Valley in the early 1960s, eventually eliminating the need to have these dump sites in the park. Since 1974, all of Yosemite's trash has been trucked out of the park to the Mariposa County landfill. And the park in 1975 began a recycling program collecting aluminum, glass, and paper. So that brings us into the modern era with increasing recycling efforts, emphasis on reducing waste, and promoting practices such as composting, and then wonderful events like Facelift. So I just want to conclude by saying that while garbage practices have changed over time, historic waste accumulation areas provide valuable information about human behavior within Yosemite National Park. Thank you.
Thank you, Erin. Thanks so much, Erin
Yeah,
Garrity.
sure.
Give it up for Erin Garrity. Erin Garrity, come on now. Yeah. Thank you so much, Erin. And then I'd like to take this opportunity to introduce my partner in crime, the man with the vision for this entire YCA, Ken Yeager. Let's bring Ken Yeager up on stage. Come on up, Ken. Thanks, dude.
How's everybody doing tonight? Yeah. This is our 19th annual. Next year's our 20th. We actually have employees now. Timmy's our new executive director. I'd like to introduce Karine. Would you stand up or wave, please? There she is. She put the event together. Thank you. And Misia, are you around? Where's Misia? She's probably outside. She's hiding. Anyway, I want to thank everybody. We've had a difficult couple years because of COVID, and before that, we had a fire. We got kicked out of the park, and we live streamed in Daly City one year. And now we're back doing live events at night, and it really feels good to do them again. And I'd like to thank everybody that's been to one before, that they're out here and reenact and get this going again. And I'd also like to thank all the new people that have come and participated in the facelift today. It was not an easy day. It was rainy, it was cold, it was wet. You guys all showed up anyway. I think we had a really good turnout for the first day on a rainy day. We've never encountered that before. And with that, I want to thank everybody. I'd also like to thank our crew back there that's serving the beer, Tioga Sequoia. And I would also like to thank our AB crew, Ed and Whittle back there, Jim Painter, Karen, And we have Max up there, and they're doing the live stream for us. Other than that, I'm going to have Timmy come back up here, and he's going to introduce the next program. And we got really good music on Saturday and 2 more nights of programming through Friday. So come back tomorrow, too. Thank you.
Thanks, Ken. Thank you, Ken Yeager. A little bit more from our sponsors here. We'd like to thank Pure Project Brewing Company, our friends that Tioga Sequoia introduced us to. You may have seen in our sponsor logos that Michelle Look built for us. There's some future facelifts. We've taken facelift to 12 other locations this year, and we have some coming up. There's one October 22nd in Joshua Tree that Pure Project will be a part of. Also, thanks to Black Diamond, they are introducing and bringing Nick Berry here, who was our next speaker. La Sportiva American Alpine Club, you'll see them out on the ball. Our friends at Yosemite Hospitality, they've been a really excellent partner for us for years. They are Aramark, the concessionaire here in the park. And Alex Galasso will be speaking tomorrow on a panel discussion on zero waste, which Aaron Garrity's show really brought to forefront this historical concept of refuse, of trash, and finding out to use 2 words, comfort and convenience. And so much of what we do and buy and then waste and throw out is driven by those 2 things. So I recommend that climbers, being into elective challenge and elective suffering, can do that inconvenient thing and make sure that you're doing your best to try and keep the stuff out of the landfill. Also, thank you to Iron Horse Vineyards, Clean Canteen, our friends at Parks Project who brought us our T-shirts, Kodiak Cakes, if you had some cakes this morning, they were great over at Yellow Pine, our friends at Osprey, Fit Socks, Yosemite View Lodge, Yeti, and Balanced Rock. Heather Sullivan right here in the audience. Give it up for Heather Sullivan and Balanced Rock. Yes, friend, we love you, El Pertel's greatest friend. And Heather will be leading tomorrow morning right out here, right out front, correct? From 7:30 to 8, if you want to get your Balanced Rock on, if you want to find yourself centered and just really present. Thank you very much to Heather for leading that. Also, tomorrow in this auditorium at 3 p.m., correct, Karine? At 3 p.m., 3 to 5, I believe, we have the National Park Service and the climbing rangers talking about the big wall permitting and the backcountry permitting that's going to be necessary for spending time above the land above the trees. So next up, we bring you dear friend of the Yosemite Climbing Association and a deep voyeur of and a voyager of these walls. I saw Nick Berry on Instagram. I love that. You have Eric Bissell, and he's like sending that pitch up on the North American wall coming out of the Black Cave. And Nick's got his phone, and he's got like this kind of hip-hop music going. And he's like, come on, dog. You got it, dog. And Eric Bissell's just sending across. And Nick's like, you got it, man. I'm taking all of my belief and sending it right to your fingertips. And it worked. That's the kind of power that this guy has. Come on, Yosemite. Make some noise for Nick Berry! Yeah, dude. Come on, dog.
Can you turn me on?
Yeah.
I don't know if I'm on.
It's on. You're on. You're on.
I am on?
Come on, dog.
Right.
You got this, dog.
Y'all hear me okay? All right. Yeah, let's give another round of applause to the YCA for bringing us all here to make Yosemite, make, one of the most beautiful areas on Earth and one of the definitely best climbing area on Earth, in my opinion, just making it a little bit better. So I'm here to talk about hashtag soul climbing. There might be a little irony in there. Do I have the clicker, Timmy? Yeah, we might need this guy. All right, be nice. All right. So, is this working? Okay, be nice. So I'm going to kind of start with my intro to climbing in Yosemite Valley. So I first came here with my 38-year-old friend, Tony, at the time, and I was 20. We loaded up his Trailblazer with eggs, pasta, tuna, peanut butter, and most importantly, Pepperidge Farm cookies. we left Salt Lake with just these giant smiles and just could not wait to lay our eyes on the giant formations of Yosemite. Tony was a Pepperidge Farm delivery driver, and so he, when all the bread and crackers and cookies would expire, he got to take them home. Luckily, in the last few days of his work, many cookies had expired. So we were all psyched, packed up with all of our major food groups, and headed off to one hot August month in Yosemite. Tony was an old-school boulder climber. Grew up in Eldo, really old-school ethics. He had this climbing philosophy where you started from the lowest grade, climbed every grade, and then you moved on to the next. So he had a very strong base. I, on the other hand, climbed for 1 year, and I just climbed whatever looked badass. So one day, under a boulder in Little Cottonwood Canyon, I lay on the pad, and I looked up and saw these people on Crescent Crack and just knew that I had to start trad climbing. The only problem was I had no idea how to multi-pitch belay. My friend Luke, on the other hand, didn't know either. But he did have 5 cams, and my dad had a handful of nuts from his canyoneering days. So I did what any new climber would do, and I called the local gear shop, IME. And I said, give me the tutorial for how to multi-pitch climb. To my disbelief, they fully gave me enough information to be confident. So we went up Crescent Crack and had a good time. Shortly after, I moved to Flagstaff, and some friends took me under their wings and befriended me, likely saving my life in the meantime, the way my climbing was going. They showed me all types of climbing, how to climb on every type of stone and every type of climbing. They showed me how to place gear and even build anchors correctly. I still don't know if they did that good of a job, because I may have short-fixed Brad Gobright on a knife blade one time. As we rolled into Yosemite Valley, I could not believe my eyes. My eyes were just bulging out of my head. And we rolled into Curry Village, put all of our things in the bear box, and started making this massive plate of spaghetti. And we started devising a plan. Unsurprisingly, Tony wanted to start off with the easy grades, so he wanted to go up Royal Arches. And he thought it'd be wise to bivvy at the base to avoid all crowds. Total Gumby maneuver. So we started making this heaping pot of spaghetti, but we barely made a dent in it. Tony was the biggest dirtbag I knew, so I knew he wasn't throwing away this pasta. He had bought this massive thing of eggs from Costco prior to leaving, hard-boiled all of them, put them in the bear box. It was August. It was 95 degrees every day. And he would eat them with also his refrigerated thing of mayo. Somehow, he never got sick. And then he would wash it down with eating an onion like it was an apple. Stomach of steel. So the next morning, we with this pasta, we didn't have a Tupperware, and so he finds this Nalgene, and he's like, dude, just put it in the Nalgene. And so I shovel it all in the Nalgene, and then the next morning we go and we wake up and we go and just try to climb Royal Arches, and I try to stomach this like cold spaghetti, but just can't really do it. Luckily, our appetite kind of grows as we climb the route, and we get to the top, and we had eaten all the spaghetti. I got to the spring on top, and I washed out the noodles and the marinara sauce, dumped it out, and then I filled the bottle up. It looked crystal clear water. I took a big chug, and I was like, Tony, this water, it tastes like spaghetti. And so 2 weeks later, we were still drinking from the spaghetti Nalgene. We started at the northeast buttress of Higher Cathedral. Tony led the first pitch, then we swapped leads. I got up to the slot, and I started climbing, and everything was going all right, and then I feel this water just coming down my leg, and it's not raining. I was like, where is this water coming from? And I look over, and after I was grinding in the slot, the Nalgene had tipped upside down and unscrewed, and it was just all down the slot. And, I was bummed I didn't have any water, but then I realized and yelled down to Tony, at least I don't have to drink that goddamn spaghetti water today. So after my first trip to Yosemite, I was really just humbled by Yosemite, the slick rock on Serenity Suns, Red Zinger, Cookie Monster, Beggar's Buttress, and just how difficult all the climbing felt with my terrible technique. The Grand Yosemite formations had really inspired me to make time and prioritize climbing in my life so I could come back and climb El Capitan, Leaning Tower, Sentinel Rock, Half Dome, Leaning Tower, and Watkins. When I was at Vertical Relief and Flagstaff, the climbing gym, these formations drove me to train harder, push through the pump, and even block out negative thoughts like drinking spaghetti water. 4 years later, I started my Astro van named Blue because it was, blue. And I headed off for Yosemite. As I passed Fresno, Blue began to sputter and lose power. Cars passed by me whizzing, honking their horns, and I thought maybe I should go back and get Blue fixed. But then El Cap was just driving me forward. I couldn't stop. I just really wanted to free climb on El Cap. So I made it over one hill, made it over another, and then I was coasting down Highway 41 into Curry Village. I tried to start up Blue the next day, but Blue wouldn't start. Blue had a bad fuel pump and alternator. The formations of Yosemite have driven me the last 4 years to improve my technique, my comfort on different rock types. While I was going to school in Flagstaff, I'd wake up at 5 a.m. twice a week, drive out to Paradise Forks, and self-belay or micro-traction 10 pitches prior to my 10 a.m. class. After class, I'd go bouldering outside, and then I'd go to the gym. There was one 8 stretch of weekends where I went to Joe's Valley, Indian Creek, Bishop, Waco, St. George, Zion, Granite Mountain, and Red Rock, just to get comfortable on the different rock types. In Curry Village, I packed up my Black Diamond haul bag. I muscled it. I had 1,000 feet of rope, a sleeping kit, cooking kit, a single set of cams, and I left dead blue. But I struggled to get the pack off the ground. I finally got it up, and I had my bike, so I swung my leg over the top. Oh, sorry, I got way behind, didn't I? Sorry. My mouth and my clicker obviously aren't working together. So here's Blue, and here's my sexy younger self. And yeah, apparently I forgot my razor. But there's my bike there. And so here's my haul bag. So I'm throwing my leg over the top of the bike, and the haul bag shifts, and it almost knocks me over. But I finally get on it, and the spoke is just creaking while I'm riding it. But El Cap's in front of me, and so I made it to manure pile, and then I started hiking. After 5 hours, I got to the top of the South A. I really wanted to check out Freerider to do it in a day. Some climbers were working South A, and I started wrapping down their lines. And then as it started deviating to Freerider, I started using my own lines. But I quickly realized as the wall was moving away from me and I was wrapping that I was going to have to leave a lot of gear, or I really needed a partner. So I kind of sucked up my ego and yelled to the other climbers. They fixed my line, and I jugged out. They ended up being Will Stanhope and Maddie Rawlinson. Later that day, I returned their rope to them, just so embarrassed. But I did learn that maybe El Cap can be a little too inspiring at times. While my friends arrived, I decided to work the South A head wall, primarily just because it was safe and I didn't need a partner for it. In May of my friend Joe Mills came in. It was 2010, and he really wanted to climb Golden Gate. He had 10 days. So we hiked up, we rapped down, stashed some things on the A5 Traverse and on the Golden Desert. And then we jugged out, rapped down South A with a plan to stash some more things in the alcove. But our ropes got stuck on the head wall, so we had to spend an unplanned bivvy on Long Ledge there. But after 2 rest days, we started climbing and got to the alcove in one long day. The forecast, this is called for 10% chance of rain. This is my knee after the monster off width. I obviously still had poor technique. And the weather called for 10% chance of rain, but it poured all night long. I had this tripod bivvy here, but I didn't know how to set it up. And my bag just got completely saturated. I was freezing cold. I begged Joe to go down and come back, but Joe was like, dude, if you knew how to set up your tripod bivvy and weren't a dumbass, you wouldn't be cold. So I was like, well, touche. I guess we're staying. Luckily, that afternoon, the sun came out and dried us out. Then the next day, we did the down climb, and then went over and did the move pitch in a few efforts, and then we had rehearsed the Golden Desert pitch, which is this beautiful pitch, and so that actually went pretty well. That and the A5 Traverse, and this is the A5 Traverse. After this route, I took a little bit of rest and then started working the South A head wall again, but I got kind of burnt out. So my friends Cedar Wright and Nick Martino were working Golden Gate, and they encouraged me to take just a fun day and wrap in and just like climb on the A5 and the Golden Desert with them. I would climb it, and they kind of got mad because I kept doing it. And then Cedar started cracking Snoop Dogg jokes, like, what's Snoop Dogg's favorite weather? Drizzle. And then that didn't work. So then he resorted to calling me Dingleberry in order to make me laugh to fall. And that was my Instagram handle for a while until I decided to get a little bit more professional. Then Mason Earl arrived in June, and so we agreed to support each other on Freerider in a day. Mason was an incredible friend and an amazing partner, and I was so grateful to have him. So we wrapped one day, checked it all out, and then Mason supported me. I had never short fixed or done any of like the speed climbing techniques, and I just had so much fun just being able to flow up this stone that was so beautiful and inspiring to me for so long. It was such an amazing day. And then I supported Mason on his effort a few days later. And then after that, I hiked up with Cody Sims to do the Salathé. We stashed our things on the block and then kept wrapping, and we simul-climbed up to the block in 8 hours, which was really kind of mind-blowing to me that we could move so quickly like that. But it was really nice because it allowed us for kind of an extra half rest day because we took a rest day on the block. And then we had this really nice evening because Mikey Schaefer and Kate Rutherford and Madeline Sorkin we let them use our portaledge for their ascent of Freerider, and they left us some whiskey. So we just sipped whiskey that evening and watched the sunset and the rock just glow in the orange alpenglow. It was so gorgeous. The next day after our rest day, we got up super early because the head wall gets sun at about 11:30, and so we wanted to get it before the sun hit. both Cody and I were able to do the South A head wall ledge-to-ledge first try, which was really great, and a huge pressure lifted off us because there's not a lot of time to climb that long of a pitch. This is all the South A head wall. And then I think it's really important to keep in mind like our impact on other climbers, especially when we're climbing really popular routes like the South A head wall. It's always really important to pull your ropes up if another party is coming and your ropes are going to get in their way. On my 21st or 25th birthday, I started up the Prophet after rehearsing the route for 3 weeks. It's on the southeast side of El Cap, right by Horsetail Falls. And I was just really inspired by the A1 Beauty pitch. Just this gorgeous seam going up this amazing, perfect rock. This is me working on the pitch. I was really inspired also by the mental challenge the route presented, and the shitty protection. The poor rock quality down low kind of was just a different change, more adventurous from like other El Cap routes, and it had these really sharp flakes, and all these kind of just added to the pressure and the commitment of the route, which just felt like a really nice challenge. My friend Madeline Sorkin, she supported me on the route, and on the first night, we made it up to the Devil's Brow, and then we were on the portaledge, and she pulled out this Hostess cupcake that I didn't know she had, and the candle, put a candle in it and sung me happy birthday. It was just this really nice time to break up the intensity of the route. But these are my incredible rope management skills. Yeah. Yeah, more great rope management here. After that, Madeline was really excited to climb on El Corazon, and I was excited to support her because she had already supported me. It just felt really fun to climb this route. This is the Coffee Corner because the protection was much better, even though it wasn't great. It was much better, and it just felt a lot more playful, and we swapped leads so that there was less commitment. This is me just, horsing around. Yosemite formations push us into partnerships that maybe we wouldn't have had otherwise, or they certainly expedite it. I think the mutual trust, the stressful experiences we all go through, and the obstacles we overcome while we climb just bring us together so quickly. And I think these bonds are incredibly unique, and it's just such a nice kind of bonus that we get from climbing. Madeline and I on the portaledge. And I think, climbing El Cap always makes me think of like climbing history too, with like Mark Hudon and Max Jones doing the first free as can be ascent of South A in 1979. And then Todd Skinner and Paul Piana doing the first free ascent of El Cap, free of the South A in 1988. And then obviously Lynn Hill having like maybe still one of the greatest achievements in climbing at our time, doing the nose in a day, and then she did it first in 1993, and then came back in 1994 and did it in a day. And still, no one's on-sighted El Cap. It's the one thing hanging out there. Hopefully, the next generation gets it done. And formations also inspire us to climb things a different style. Sometimes you want to lead every pitch, and sometimes you want to climb it team freestyle with your partner. And it's all part of like the amazing things that kind of like different formations kind of make us think are more conducive to whichever style of climbing. Just like, on the Prophet, I led all the pitches, but on El Corazon, Madeline and I swapped leads, each sharing equal amount of crux pitches. In 2013, it was going to be my last season before starting a nursing school in Yosemite, so I really wanted to try dihedral wall, but we got 2 pitches up. James Lucas was belaying me, and we were 2 pitches up, and luckily James, being the shitty belayer he is, he was texting while belaying. And his friend was like, dude, that's closed. And it was the first time it had been closed. So we wrapped down, and we went over to the final frontier on Fifi Buttress and looked for a new route potential. Luckily, the beautiful corners and the features all turned out really nicely, and we spent 3 weeks establishing the route, and eventually doing the first free ascent. This got me thinking of other, formations that weren't El Cap after I'd climbed a few El Cap routes. So then we looked over at the Wet Lycra Nightmare. Mason and I were both really excited to, here's James on Fifi on the Crux, and then here's Wet Lycra Nightmare, to check out the route with the really amazing features and things. It was just a very different style of route than normal Yosemite routes. Had like this harder slab pitch and a V9 boulder prom, hard stemming, and it was all capped off by a 13A chicken wing chimney that kind of looms over you the whole time. And this is the crux pitch here. So I met Mason on May 1st of 2018, and we went up to like the somewhat, it just kind of has an eerie feeling. The route has a history of kind of taking people's climbing careers. It's really sad. Like Dan Osmond died in a rope jumping accident, and Todd Skinner died when his belay loop failed. So after about a week and a half, Mason and I had done the crux pitch, and we woke up the next day, and I went over to Mason's van. He was just absolutely floored. He could barely get out of the van. And we just thought he needed rest, but it wasn't improving. I continued to work on the route, and then I did it with Eric Bissell, leading all the pitches. But Mason never really fully recovered. Many years later, he was diagnosed with MECFS, which is essentially like chronic fatigue syndrome. And it just really hurt to have like one of my best friends, like, kind of have their climbing career stripped on that wall as well. And this is the chicken wing chimney pitch. Like this just made me realize that I really need to go after my climbing goals, because I didn't know when climbing could be stripped from me as well. So after spending a lot of time on El Cap, I was looking over at Middle Cathedral all the time, and I knew about Mikey Schaefer's amazing ground-up effort on Father Time. So I really wanted to put my fitness to use on that route. It's like 1,000 feet of granite slab tapped off by like much steeper crux corners up top. It has really notorious pitches like the Boulder Prom, the Athletic 12C, and the Index 11D. And I had climbed up, ground up with Brad Gobright about a year and a half prior to doing this, and we both failed on the Athletic 12C pitch. So I wrapped it one day working the Crux 3 pitches, and then rested 2 days. I swapped leads with my friend Nate. This is the Boulder Prom pitch. Up to the upper corners where the Crux pitches are, and then I led all of the pitches. I did the Boulder Prom first try, which I was really psyched on, and then did the Athletic 12C first try. A little bit of background. So when Cedar Wright made the first ascent of gravity ceiling on Higher Cathedral Spire, he rated it 13A. A lot of Yosemite climbers were a little taken back by this because Cedar wasn't really known for being the strongest climber, and there weren't that many 13As in the valley. So one day when in the lodge calf, Rob Miller was there, and he had just climbed the route, and Cedar asked him, "So, how hard do you think the route is, Rob?" And Roder says, "Well, Cedar, I climbed from the ground. You wrapped in. I placed all the gear on lead. You pink-pointed. You called it 513, but I think it's more like athletic 12C. So when Mikey Schaefer and James Lucas were trying the 513 lieback on Father Time, they jokingly called it the athletic 12C. The last hard pitch was the index 11D pitch. It's this one. It has very few holds, and it's all about technique. I fell 3 times going to the final hold, and then had to change my beta, but it was like a total, left nothing on the field sort of moment, and had a massive 18-hour day on the route, but was able to do it, luckily. After that, I was really excited to go back and climb on El Cap. My friend Eric Bissell and I teamed up, and we worked out the bottom pitches, and then after 2 days, we went from the ground. Eric led the Black Dyke slab, and then I led the next to the missing link in the Galapagos pitch. And then we swapped leads up to this really nice ledge, Big Sur. And we spent 5 days on the route, and his amazing wife met us up on top afterwards with chips and some coconut waters, and we just had this amazing time. This route climbs some really incredible features. This is the Black Dihedral, and this is the notorious Black Cave. This is me bat hanging again. And after doing the Black Cave, we're coming down to get some things from Eric. And this is one of the really nice 12C pitches. And then I have some videos.
Just staying in one place.
More great rope management for me.
All clean and coiled. Oh, it's around the corner now. Oh, God.
Yeah. And then this is Eric.
Is it a dog? You're... Yeah. Punk can do what he does best, bone crushing crimps, yo. Oh, head snap! Arm snap! Ready? Chalk it up. Get that dino flake, brah. Straight above. Go giddy. Go get Ah, shit, man. Don't blow it. You're at the anchor. The anchor's right here. Drama, snap. Into the big arch we go. Psyched. We have shade today. How excited are you for shade, Eric?
I'm so excited.
So excited.
So excited.
Well done.
Yeah, it's always important to stay serious, And then here's the Black Cave. Eric had this really heroic effort. I was so
Come on, dog.
proud of him.
Come on. Give her. Yeah. Come on, dude. Come on. Everything. Come on. Yeah. Come on. Get in there. Yeah. Come on. Good, dude. Come on, kick him over. Come on. Get it up. That's it, dude. Come on. Yes. Come on. Yes. Come on, dude. Yeah.
But yeah. And part of me loves this video because Eric's trying so hard, but this is the worst I've ever seen Eric climb. He is the best, one of the best technical climbers I've ever seen in my life, but it was so cool to just see him just give so much effort, and just get up it by raw determination. It was amazing. And this is us kind of warming up for the last pitch called Lucy's
Punk can
Labrador.
rock that shit. Oh, what? What? What's going on? What'd you just do?
We sussed the beta.
Sussing the beta.
We're feeling good about the beta.
Yeah, you're all limbered up, boy. You're ready to do it. That's how we do. Great day. Honnold just took a whipper. I hope he performs better next go.
This was when Tommy and Alex were trying
We're
this
encouraging him. Don't worry.
Passage to Freedom, so they're over there too. It's fun. We were like hollering back at each other. It's good times. And this is us after we had kind of done all the
Pumpkin.
hard pitches, and
How you
we woke up
feeling?
feeling wrecked.
So tired.
We're destroyed. We're just talking about how hauling and free climbing El Cap, it's all these different fatigue levels building into this magnificent multi-layer fatigue cake.
Fatigue cake.
You're gonna num it? Num.
Yeah, I think that's just like such a fun part of climbing is like just how much, when you love it that much, it's just so fun, and you have a partner that like you jive with that well, it's so incredible. It's like, it just doesn't get any better than that. So driving into Yosemite Valley, you always see, coming in from Highway 41, you just see dihedral wall. It's this massive left-facing corner, absolutely gorgeous, draws you in. And ever since I first went to Yosemite, I was completely captivated by this route. And I had this picture in my childhood bedroom of Tommy on this route, and it was like always in my mind. So I had done like the Prophet, which had a 13D pitch and 5 lower end 513 pitches, but dihedral wall had 5 13 plus pitches and a 14A pitch. And I knew I would really have to level up my climbing in order to do it. So I decided to really train hard, and I took a travel nursing job in Tacoma, Washington, and went back to work at the hospital, but also went to work at Seattle Bouldering Project. The training program felt hard, but the perfect left-facing corners of the dihedral wall really pushed me through at each lifting session. And the crux arching flake pushed me through each hangboard workout, and the black arch pushed me to give 100% on each of my limit bouldering days. After 3 months of specific training for dihedral wall, I drove down the I-5 to Yosemite. I aid soloed a lot of the route just because I wanted the experience, and yeah, I wanted to aid the route before I started working on it. My friend Carlo and Davey belayed me for a few pitches, but there's a lot of aid soloing. And after a month's worth of work, I knew that I had to still level up because my endurance and strength just weren't what they needed to be to do the route. So I took another travel nursing job in Fremont, California. Went back to work in the gym, and dihedral wall was really pushing me through each workout. I was just so inspired by the route. The following year I returned. The moves felt easier. I had more endurance. I did the crux pitch on micro traction. And I did the hard 13D slab 3 times in 30 minutes. So I really felt like I was ready. And then literally the next day, a storm rolled in and dumped 12 inches of snow, followed by 10 days of about the same amount of snow. I was devastated to be shut down by the route and by conditions. But after reflecting on the experience, I just realized that I just really enjoyed the process and the level and the inspiration that dihedral wall gave me and pushed me to become. I enjoyed the movement and just everything about it. And yeah, I didn't succeed, but I'd gambled a little bit and I'd learned a lot from it. And I just realized that it's kind of like a magnificent failure, a lot like Hayden. And this encompassed a lot of like the characteristics of soul climbing that I really, really cherish. So I felt that it was a success in that way. And then these are just some more pictures of dihedral wall here. This is like, it's got to be one of the best pitches on El Cap. It's so amazing, called the Black Arch. But yeah, I've been continuously inspired by the formations in Yosemite and dihedral wall. They inspired me to improve, to alter my life, to go to the gym, to hangboard. El Nino taught me how to utilize each partner's strength to help you gain the summit. Wet Lycra and El Corazon taught me the value of partnerships, of like-minded people, and how your peers can push you to be the best you. The Prophet taught me how to fight my fear and calm my mind and stay present. Salate taught me how hard to work in order to accomplish your goals, and how that work feels easy when you're so inspired. As people, we all have this innate desire to climb beautiful rock formations. Different formations speak to different climbers, but we all are climbers because the rocks call to us. Yosemite is exceptionally spectacular. Even non-climbers get captivated by climbing when you're in Yosemite due to the rocks inspiring them. When routes have large, clean features, the appeal to climb them is even greater. This is where Yosemite really shows how unique and spectacular it is. The Great Roof on the nose, the Salate head wall, the Black Arch on dihedral wall, the A1 Beauty on the Prophet, these are some of the most beautiful pitches in the world. Yes, Yosemite is most known for big wall climbing, but it also has inspiring climbs for boulders, sport climbers, and single pitch trad climbers. Think of Midnight Lightning, King Cobra, The Rift, Dominator, King Air, and Bruce Lee. Sport routes such as Cookie Monster, Peace, Empire, Crossroads, Whipcord, Keep the Muscle, Lose the Fat, and Silverback Arrête. Single pitch trad climbs like the Phoenix, Tales of Power, Red Zinger, Magic Line, Cosmic Debris, and Separate Reality. These are just a few of the spectacular routes that Yosemite offers, and are as rare as they come. These lines keep you up at night. These lines will alter your entire life, change the way you see the world. These lines will make you quit your job, live in a van, and eat spaghetti out of a Nalgene, just so you can have experiences on them. As climbers, we often take full credit for our achievements. Yes, we did put in the effort. We're technically proficient, mentally resilient enough to succeed on the route. However, the inspiration came from El Cap, Leaning Tower, Middle Cathedral, even the spaghetti water of Royal Arches. The formations drove us to train harder and rise to the level of the route. The formation was inspiring enough to alter our life to enable us to have the free time to climb this piece of rock that is so inspiring. When a formation inspires you to be our absolute best in order to have an experience on the beautiful formation, all of the work does not feel as hard when the formation's driving us. They are the greatest motivators of all. Understanding this and giving the inspiring formations the rightful credit for being the driving force and soul of our sport is an incredibly unique aspect of climbing. This is what makes climbing experiences exceptionally rich and meaningful, differentiating our sport from others. We are pursuing climbing for the experience, not solely for an achievement. This is the soul climbing way, climbing for the line. Climbing because we are incredibly inspired by the natural formations, for the love of climbing. No grades, no social praise. Do it because you feel the rock calling to you, because you are a soul climber. As climbers, it is also our responsibility to make sure future generations are also inspired by the formations and feel the innate instinct to climb beautiful features Yosemite offers. If we do not take care of these rock formations, the soul of our sport will die. This is us on a previous cleanup. And without inspiring rock formations, there will be nothing unique about our sport. We must do our part to preserve these beautiful, inspiring formations for the future. Let's go clean up some trash and keep soul climbing alive.
Nick, hold on, I have a question for you.
Yeah.
So thank you very much. Give it up for Nick Berry right now. Nick Berry, Nick Berry. So the rotten eggs, the hot mayo, the raw onions.
Yeah.
Tony, your partner, what was his breath like?
Uh,
Was that the crux of the climb?
Yeah, like, it definitely, he was a really efficiency-oriented climber, and I can definitely tell you that our changes of belay were much faster because of that.
You would hold your head here,
Yeah,
just
exactly.
give me the rack, and then
I was
keep
like,
going
put the
up.
rack on me, over here, okay.
And then I noticed during your talk, you used the word support a lot. Like
Yeah.
Madeline supporting you on your send, you supporting her, et cetera. And I'm curious on how that exercise of support with partnerships in climbing affects the rest of your life, or how you take those lessons and apply them to your life as a nurse or your life with all relationships.
Yeah, I think that's really important. Honestly, climbing feels really selfish in general to me. But I think that support mechanism and like giving back through these sort of events are like really the only way that we can like give back and make it less selfish, But yeah, it's a huge part. I think that's a lot of why I like nursing so much, is it gives me this like incredible other venue in order to like give back, and support others,
Well, you have this serious medical career as a nurse, and then you take your climbing so incredibly serious. What don't you take serious?
Honestly, I'm really serious, but I also like to joke around and be goofy all the time while I'm doing it. Because otherwise, I'm having fun. I only do this because I love it, I love climbing so much. It's all I really want to do.
We noticed you up there dancing and singing and
Yeah.
not taking it actually that serious. Give it up for Nick Berry here, not the most serious climber on the planet. Thanks, Nick. Thanks a ton for being here.
Yeah.
And thanks again for Black Diamond and Jess Powell. The cool thing about BD is Jess Powell is the Events and Partnership Manager, much like our lovely Karine Tarpinian is our Events and Partnership Manager at the YCA. But Jess just hosted the Facelift Act Local in Salt Lake City on September 10th. She's also the board chair of the Salt Lake City Climbers Alliance. So you have people that are just really nailing it on multiple levels. And we're going to nail the break now on multiple levels. Ed, we're going to take a brief break, correct? We're going to take a brief break, and then don't go too far. Get yourself a beverage, use the bathroom, crack some jokes with Nick Berry after you wash your hands. And then we'll be right back with Jordan Cannon. We got 10. See you in 10.
Check.
Okay. I think we should get started. Do you think, like, shouldn't we get started here? Let's get started. Let's get started. Applause for starting. Yes. How about applause for finishing? Yeah, being a finisher, getting it done. Okay. So I'd like to thank our friends at Tioga Sequoia once again. Thank you, Michael, Maddie, for this delicious Hellas lager. Cheers to all of your healths, to peace, to goodness, to kindness, to compassion, to goodwill, to feeling the stoke of Nick Berry every moment that you're awake. Yes, I'll drink to that. Don't knock this over. Okay. A little bit more love for our sponsors. Thank you once again to our co-presenting sponsor, the North Face, our friends at Cliff Bar, who are actually in the Valley hosting a little off-site for their athletes. Our friends at Patagonia and Royal Robbins, and again, Touchstone Climbing, Arc'teryx, Toad & Co., and the Koros Wearables. So our next presenter is no stranger to these walls. In fact, in 2017, I had the good fortune of partnering up with young Jordan Cannon. And I remember the day well in Yosemite, spiriting up the death slabs, heading up to the northwest face of Half Dome, making our way 7 hours up the big face together, sprinting down, only to get onto El Cap. We were doing the 2 stones in one day. But we had heard the grim news just the day before. Our dear friend Quinn Brett was paralyzed irreparably from the waist down in an injury on the nose of El Capitan. So I looked over to Jordan Cannon and I said, Jordan, I don't know if I feel like going up there and seeing the sight of our dear friend's injury. And Jordan looked at me and he said, Timmy, I understand. We could go down. And I said, yes, let's descend. Ever since then, we've been very close friends. When I heard that Jordan had made the stellar news of the big relief of coming out to his family, to his friends, to his tribe, I thought, that's gotta feel sweet. Much like Nick Berry getting to the top of those free climbs, much like Aaron Garrity buried deep in the archaeology of lost citizens and lost societies. We do what makes us feel good, and we are in search of that. And I would like a warm facelift Yosemite round of applause for our next presenter, Jordan Cannon. Come on, baby. Yeah, come on. Come on. Yeah, dude, slay it. Yeah. Yeah, Jordan. Slay it.
All right. My friend Mark was supposed to be here to present with me tonight. This is a show we actually did for the American Alpine Club this March at this more formal event, so it's a little scripted, more like a story, but plans changed. He wasn't able to make it, and this would have been our 3rd time doing it. We would have nailed it. We were ready to go. And I had to scramble last minute to kind of rewrite his parts from my perspective, and yeah, I'm going to try and do it solo. So
thank you, Jordan.
yeah.
Woo!
Can we bring the house lights down, though? That makes me feel a lot better. Thank you. Okay, well, thank you guys for being here. Before we start, I'm going to be talking about 2 different stories. The first story is about a film featuring Mark and I called Free as Can Be. Has anybody seen that film? Okay, great. I'm going to give a little bit of a personal recap, share some things from the film that might be fun for people who have seen it already, and then, educate people who maybe haven't seen it yet. And then I'm going to follow up that with a second story, which is a story that was happening behind that story, which is more of a behind-the-scenes look at my personal struggle to be happy with myself and become who I am today. So, without... Okay, so for starters, I'd like to tell you guys a little bit about Mark's climbing history and explain why I even wanted to climb with an old guy like Mark in the first place. For as long as I've been climbing in Yosemite, I've been interested in its history and the people that have contributed to it, especially the free climbing era of the 70s. Of course, I'd heard a lot about the Stone Masters, but for whatever reason, I hadn't heard about Mark or his partner, Max Jones. Even though they were climbing in Yosemite around the same time, they were just a little less well known, but still equally as badass and respectable if not more so. Very quickly, I fell in love with Max and Mark's story because of their unique vision and attitude towards climbing, as well as their significant contributions to free climbing, which would go on to influence generations to come, my own included. So Max and Mark are probably most well known for their free as can be approach, which enabled them to look at routes in Yosemite that had yet to be free climbed and see their potential. Like El Cap, for example, whereas most people in the valley at the time looked up at El Cap and deemed it too hard to be free climbed, Max and Mark just looked up at it and thought, well, the most fun thing we can imagine is going up and free climbing on El Cap. And even if we don't think we can free climb the whole thing, we're still going to go up there and try and do as much of it as we can anyways. So in 1979, that's exactly what they did. Max and Mark gave the first legit free attempt of El Cap and ended up free climbing all but 300 feet of the 3,000-foot route, far exceeding expectations and opening the door for the next generation. So here's a photo I'm sure most people here are familiar with. That's Alex free soloing the Enduro corner on the left in 2017, and then Max Jones leading it on the right in 1979. Which, fun fact, I don't know how many of you know this, but when they first freed this pitch, it was the first 512 ever to be climbed on El Cap. So even though Max and Mark came pretty close to free climbing El Cap in 1979, they never went back to go and try it again. However, like Nick mentioned, 10 years later, Todd Skinner and Paul Piana eventually completed the first free ascent of the Salathé, essentially finishing what Max and Mark had started. Shortly afterwards, Lynn Hill did the first free ascent of the Nose in 1994, and then went back a year later, the year that I was born actually, and free climbed it in a day, which totally upped the ante of big wall free climbing. I could go on like this for hours, but the point is that Max and Mark were essentially the ones who opened the door not only for free climbing on El Cap, but for free climbing in Yosemite in general. It's because of their original effort that climbing on El Cap is where it is now, to the point of Tommy Caldwell climbing the Dawn Wall and even Alex Holland soloing the Free Rider. So that's why I became a fan of Max and Mark and why I looked up to them as my heroes, because of what they did for free climbing in Yosemite and for me, now that that's my favorite thing to do. Any Donner Summit fans in the house? Yeah, love Donner Summit. This is actually where Mark and I first met at a climbing event at Donner Summit, which is a place I've spent a lot of time while I was working and living in Reno. But it's also where Mark and Max did a lot of classic first ascents in the 70s and where I was really introduced to them in the first place, reading the guidebook and climbing a lot of their routes. Someone had told me about the event and that Mark was going to be there. And aside from just wanting to go and meet another one of my heroes, I was aware that Mark was still climbing and still climbing hard, and that he had still wanted to free climb El Cap. So that's what I was really eager to talk to him about upon meeting him. When I first met Mark, I asked him if he wanted to go climbing at Snowshed and immediately started asking him about the Free Rider. What he basically told me was that he had written it off and that he'd already given it a few attempts, but none of them went very well, and that if he was going to do it again, he'd need somebody to haul the entire route, and then he'd need to dedicate a year of climbing with that person for the entire year. And given that I'd already climbed the route before and wanted to go back and climb it in a day, I knew that I'd be a good partner for Mark. And the idea of doing it with him, you know, someone who had contributed so much to climbing in Yosemite, made it seem really appealing to me. Until then, I felt like I'd been rather selfish in my climbing, so I was looking for an opportunity to give back, and helping Mark bring his lifelong goal of free climbing El Cap to fruition was the perfect objective, so I just made him an offer. This is from our first day of climbing together at that event. Someone had brought their old Swami Belt EBs and hexes, and so I got really psyched to try and repeat a bunch of Mark's routes at Snowshed, essentially using the same gear that he did to do the first ascent 40 years ago. Has anyone ever climbed in a Swami Belt? I know there's a few people in here. Yeah. I have a theory after this. This was an eye-opening day. It was so fun. One, EBs, they're pretty bad because they're 40 years old, but like not as bad as you'd think. Swami belt, you feel like a ninja climbing with a Swami belt because you're just totally free. But you know how there were people back in the 70s and before were all against hang dogging because it just wasn't the ethic. You got to go from the ground, you got to lower. Well, I think what they're leaving out there is the fact that when you fall in a Swami, you couldn't hang dog if you wanted to anyways. Their Swami belt comes up to here and you're immediately gasping for breath like, lower. So I took a few whips that day and learned that early on, and I was like, I don't know if you guys were actually that rad. You just couldn't breathe. So compared to other climbers or heroes I'd met, I was really impressed by Mark because he didn't make me feel like I had to prove myself in order to gain his acceptance. He was super fun and easygoing and appeared to have no ego for comparisons, regardless of our generational differences. Free climb El Cap is also a really big deal for Mark, but I knew it was something that he really wanted to do. He usually spends his winters kiteboarding in Mexico, and just before he left that year, after we had climbed quite a bit that summer, he sent me this text saying that he was all in and he was ready to devote a year of his life to it. Yeah, that was a cool moment. Do we have any Lord of the Rings fans in the house? I shared this on Instagram the other day. I just included this, so this basically sums it up.
I think I'm quite ready for another adventure.
If Mark was here right now, he'd be standing on a stool. We normally have a whole bit making fun of his his height, but anyways, that was a good laugh. So I was pretty psyched when I read that text. Did I just go out? No, okay. Because I just knew that we'd have a ton of fun climbing together. At the time, I didn't really have many big wall partners, and even though Mark was 4 years older than me, he was the first person that I really felt comfortable with. Because we were both just totally on the same page in terms of climbing. But even aside from that, having gotten to know Mark more by this point, I could tell that he'd be a great mentor, and I was psyched knowing that I'd learn a lot from him in the process. So after that text, it was official. Mark's goal was to climb the free rider in however many days it would take, and my goal was to climb it in a day. And so we planned to meet up in Joshua Tree 4 months later in the spring and get after it. So after climbing with Mark a while the first season we met, it was pretty clear to me that the main thing he needed to do in order to prepare for the free rider was climb a lot and overcome the idea that 512 was this big hard number in his mind. Basically coming off the couch, he was climbing 512 again within like 2 weeks, but he just needed to do a lot more mileage, and so we essentially just got to tour around the country and climb a bunch of routes and get fit for Yosemite. So here's a short clip from the film that best describes our road trip together.
I didn't exactly know how he was going to do it, how he was going to support me, but when I showed up in Joshua Tree in March, he had a total plan. He had, we're going to do this, we're going to do that, we're going to do this, we're going to go here, we're going to do this, we're going to do this, we're going to do this. And I was just going, damn.
Mark, how's this pitch going?
It's hard.
In the past year, Mark and Jordan have been on a road trip together all over the U.S., training and preparing for these two goals.
I feel like a hammerhead shark.
Jordan is not a chill rock climber.
Yeah, money. Come on, crank.
He likes to lay everything out. He's very organized.
Nobody else, I can imagine, would have taken the time to teach him the new ways of climbing, of getting fit, of rappelling down and working El Cap from above.
How was that for you?
That was, well, I'm alive.
Okay, today we're teaching old dog new tricks.
Me being the old dog.
You only look old.
Well, okay, thanks.
They've been shredding all over the place. They've been in Vegas, they've been in Zion, they've been in the Valley, all these iconic big wall areas, and sending hard routes.
The lighting's making you look way more ripped right now than you actually are.
Hey, fuck you. It's hard even to talk about all the routes we've done. And these routes are hard. I mean, there's days where I just think I'm gonna die. But yet, I just seem to be coming back stronger. Yes! It was tough, but I've just basically had the best climbing year of my life.
That's the best I've ever done. I knew you could do it.
That was cool.
Perfect.
I felt casual.
Gosh, I wish he was here. It would make this a lot easier. One thing Mark had to clear up at the start of our trip was our definition of fun. He's been climbing for a long time, and he knows how to get the most out of it. So he told me that he wanted to free climb El Cap, but he also wanted to make sure that we had fun doing it. So our motto for the rest of our trip was, fun is job one. So with fun being our primary focus, we went to Zion about halfway through our trip, which is where we really started to pick up some momentum and find our stride. I'd wanted to climb Moonlight Buttress, but could tell that Mark was getting tired and started to feel intimidated by the difficulty of the route. I had climbed it before, and I knew that he had a really good chance of sending it. He just had to overcome the mental hurdles that he had created in his mind. He wasn't feeling very strong or confident, but he told me this is his motto when he's not feeling this way, that he's going to technique the shit out of it. Which is a good technique goes a long way, let me just say that. So amazingly, pitch after pitch, Mark just kept not falling. And then after he followed the crux pitch without falling, I knew there was hope. I encouraged him to just keep trying, and eventually he flashed the entire route. It was one of our best days of climbing together, and I know that it gave Mark an immense confidence boost, and it was super inspiring for me. And after that, I knew we were looking good for the next season in Yosemite. Once we got to the valley, our first mission was to hike to the top of El Cap and wrap down the free rider so we could both work on the crux. I was going to do the boulder problem pitch, and Mark was going to do the Teflon corner. And this was something that basically blew Mark's mind because it was exactly 40 years since he and Max had been on the south ahead wall trying to free climb it. And back then, they never would have even considered wrapping in from the top to work pitches like we do nowadays. He always would say, back in the day, we would hike to the base and climb up and then hike down and not the other way around. But we ended up doing that a few times together. So Mark and I often joke that I mentor him in climbing and he mentors me in life, which may seem kind of backwards given that he's been climbing twice as long as I've been alive. But if you consider how different big wall free climbing tactics are now, wrapping in from the top was to work the hardest pitches was one of the ways I knew I'd be able to help get Mark closer to accomplishing his goal. I wouldn't necessarily recommend this approach now as it's hard to do without impacting other parties since the route is pretty popular, but I mean, he is 63 and I had to make it as easy for him as possible. So what he had done before didn't work, so we had to think outside the box and consider a different approach. After working the route for a couple weeks, Mark felt that he had everything figured out, and so we started up at 7 in the evening and climbed through the night to the alcove in order to beat the heat on the lower half of the route. Mark had been having trouble with the roof on the third pitch because it's pretty reachy, but that evening he did it first try and then cruised the rest of the free blast and everything up to the alcove, no problem, so we got off to a pretty good start on our first day. And that first day on the route was definitely one of our most cherished climbing experiences together. It was cool, the stars were out, it was quiet, and we were up there all alone, free climbing on El Cap. So even though big wall climbing is a lot of work, when you're camped out on the side of the wall trying the same hard pitch over and over, there tends to be a lot of downtime. And so since I was the support man, I tried to bring plenty of cookies and downloaded some Netflix shows on my phone, which helped make our ascent a little more fun amidst Mark's struggle to ascend the Teflon corner. And watching Mark try to free climb El Cap in his 60s, I could see that it was as much of a mental game for him as it was a physical one. He was motivated and strong, but he had a hard time staying positive. He told me that he didn't want to let failure ruin the whole adventure, but after working the crux pitch for 2 days, it was pretty clear that he wasn't going to be able to do it. And if you're thinking, did he try the boulder problem? He's like very short, and it's quite reachy, so it wasn't really an option. There are only 2 bolts on the Teflon corner, and eventually Mark decided to just pull on the bolts and aid through the hardest 15-foot section and then free climb the rest of the pitch to the anchor. So I'd say he put in a really good effort, and even though he wasn't able to do the crux, there was still a lot of hard climbing left before we reached the summit, and he had to stay focused if he still wanted to climb the route as free as can be. So a few pitches higher, we talked about this photo Mark had showed me of him sitting on Block Ledge in 1974. He was 18 at the time in this photo, which was 45 years ago. And then there he was again, trying to free climb it. It was all pretty crazy, to be honest, but it was really cool for me to see someone like Mark, who's had an entire lifetime of climbing, still be out there doing it. And he even joked with me that I had to come back in 40 years to see what it's like to be up there at his age. So here's a video of Mark and I topping out after spending 6 days on the route together.
Oh boy. Made it. Great job.
Oh, God. You did great. Oh, God. Oh, shit. That was freaking nuts.
How long have we been talking about doing that?
More than a year.
You happy? Happy with that?
Yeah. I'm going to take that.
2 moves, that's it.
2 moves. 2 moves of aid.
You did all the rest.
Yeah, I did all the rest. I free climbed the whole thing.
Yeah, you did. It's freaking wild, isn't it?
Oh, shit.
Let's give it up for the old guys. There we go. Yeah, people sometimes ask why Mark was crying up there. First of all, I think it was one of the hardest things he'd ever done in his climbing. And to tell you the truth, I could tell that he was glad to be done with it. Of course, he was a little sad that he hadn't been able to free climb the whole thing, but he still essentially realized his dream from 40 years ago and brought his entire climbing story full circle. And while we were on the summit, I did the math and calculated that Mark's ascent was 99.7% free as can be. From 300 feet of aid in 1979 to 15 feet of aid with me in 2019. So I think that's pretty good. Okay, so that was Mark's ascent. But nowadays in Yosemite, the holy grail of big wall free climbing is to free climb El Cap in a day. So that was our next objective together. After having just climbed it with Mark over 6 days, I was psyched to go back and try and do it in under 24 hours. So we rested for a few days and then went back up to give it a shot. Climbing El Cap in a day versus climbing at wall style is such a different experience. And I had so much fun getting to climb pitch after pitch with Mark jogging behind me in support. This is the boulder problem. Something I'd like to note, does anybody climb in socks? No? I normally get made fun of, but I mean, I've free climbed El Cap in a day a few times wearing socks, so. Also, I wouldn't have been. Somebody stole my shoes I had stashed in the alcove, so I had no choice but to climb in my big guys. Anyways. Mark told me that back in his day, El Cap felt like it was 15,000 feet tall, and they never thought it could be free climbed in a day. But then there we were, actually doing it. It was kind of like he was the past and I was the present, but at the end of the day, we were still just there climbing it together. I truly think that one of the best things about climbing is that you get to meet and hang out with your heroes. Mark is a real-life hero in my mind, and to be able to free climb El Cap with Mark's support was really, really special for me. I was pretty psyched to free the free rider in a day on my first attempt, but on the hike down, I already started diminishing it, saying things like, oh, well, 14 hours isn't that fast. But Mark told me that it didn't matter, that setting the goal, working towards it, appreciating the process, and then celebrating success were the reward. So I just tried to focus on that instead. Okay, so that was the story told as free as can be. If you haven't seen it, I hope you'll still go watch it. But now I'm going to rewind to the summer of 2019, just a few months before Mark and I went to Yosemite, and fill you in on what was going on behind the scenes. This is where Mark speaks a lot, and I kind of tried to paraphrase what he wrote. So if it sounds weird, it's generally because I changed like Jordan to me or I or something. As our trip progressed, Mark got to learn a little bit more about who I was. He told me that I was considerate, mature, and intelligent and honest, but that I was also still young and still a kid. I was 25 years old at the time and had the usual level of competitiveness, and still felt the need to prove myself to everyone in order to be accepted. And I care a lot about what people thought of me at the time, regardless of whether it was real or imagined. Mark was fine with it, though, because he felt like I was acting appropriately for my age. He knew that I was young, that I was still trying to figure out what mattered to me and what was important. Ultimately, I was trying to build my foundation and figure out who I was and who I wanted to be. At the end of the summer, before going to Yosemite for our final push on the route, I told Mark that I had something to tell him. But every time we tried to talk, I would get really nervous and anxious and eventually just hesitate and put it off. Mark had absolutely no idea what was going on with me at the time. As I mentioned before, I basically mentored Mark in climbing, and he mentored me in life. And throughout the many months that we climbed together, we ended up talking about my life a lot. However, after a while, having already told Mark all about my childhood and the struggles with my family and their church, I knew that I was leaving out a huge piece of the puzzle, and I could tell that my story was no longer adding up for him, especially lacking this crucial bit of information that I'd kept hidden from everyone, even myself, for so many years. So eventually, I just got fed up with myself and decided that I was going to tell Mark one night after work. So we sat outside beside our vans in the dark near Lake Tahoe. And until then, I'd never really had a friend like Mark before. Never had someone who made me feel seen, understood, or appreciated the way that he did. After a while, it seemed as if Mark's honest acceptance of me helped me become more honest and accepting of myself. However, I still had a lot of fear and shame about what I wanted to tell him, and for whatever reason, it was a lot easier for me to tell him in the dark, just like it is right now. Eventually, I said to him, "You know, Mark, the main reason I haven't been able to talk to my family in recent years is because they think that I'm gay." And he said, "Really?" Kind of surprised. And I said, "Yeah, because I'm pretty sure that I am." Thankfully, that made no difference at all to Mark. Of course, he was sad to hear about how my family had reacted, but eventually realized how profoundly it had affected my life and stepped in to help. At the end of the day, he was still proud to have me as a friend and made it known that he was going to support me and make sure that I felt loved and accepted regardless. And for the most part, age never really mattered between us. But in the time leading up to that moment, I was very aware of our generational differences because of how hard it was for me to tell him. In a way, it was sort of a test. I had tried to open up about this part of myself when I was a teenager, but it didn't go very well, and I was essentially shoved back into the closet, never to mention it again until 10 years later when I met Mark. And even though I knew I could trust him, I was still terrified of getting rejected, especially given the significant role he was playing in my life at the time and how desperately I wanted his approval. And that's why it meant so much for me to see him respond in such a positive way when I finally told him. Although I was still scared, that experience gave me hope for the future and encouraged me to continue the process of opening up and being honest about who I am. But our evenings became our discussions became pretty serious. Mark knew that climbing was essentially the only thing that made me feel whole for a long time. And so he encouraged me to put my climbing successes, or any successes really, into a positives column and take confidence from those achievements. He told me how he had taken courage and confidence from his own climbing and applied them to other parts of his life, relationships, business. But ultimately, he wanted me to know that his love and respect did not depend on climbing successes, and that it was very important for me to understand that. Like many people who have struggled to fill some sort of void in their lives, I looked outward and tried to find fulfillment through my climbing, which was the only thing that had ever really given me much confidence. And at the end of Free as Can Be, Mark explains how he hoped my experience on the free rider would boost my confidence and ultimately make me feel better about myself as a person. But unfortunately, it didn't seem to make much of a difference. And although I didn't realize it at the time, it would take me a whole nother year of climbing successes and personal progression to realize that those external achievements weren't going to change anything. Ultimately, I realized that if I wanted to be happy, I had to learn to accept myself for who I was, just as Mark already had. So in 2020, Mark returned from his yearly trip to Mexico into the surreal world of COVID, social distancing, and quarantine. And we lucked out when some friends let us stay at their house in South Lake Tahoe, which had a really nice climbing garage. And aside from training, we spent a lot of hours and days discussing my situation. And it definitely wasn't easy. There were a lot of times when Mark had to call a timeout. I could tell that he was totally improvising, but it meant a lot to me that he was doing his best and trying to be honest and supportive with me along the way. And as it was for many, COVID was hard. We were both two van lifers with no real place to stay at home, so really grateful to our friends that let us stay at their place and happy to have Mark there with me. And aside from focusing a lot of time and energy on my training, I also started seeing a therapist thanks to Mark's suggestion. And that, in addition to his support, really gave me the opportunity to work myself and start noticing some positive change and direction. Eventually, things opened up a bit, and we headed out to spend the summer climbing. We hit Donner Summit in California, and Ten Sleep in Wyoming, Rifle in Colorado, and then Yosemite again in the fall. But it's sort of a transition year for us. I had supported Mark the year before, which was a really good base building year for me. But then in 2020, I was trying to climb a lot more 513s and hopefully break into 514 as well. But that was fine, because Mark was able to blame me on my projects, and I could do the same for him. And eventually, during that whole process, Mark began advocating for me to start coming out to my friends, and even advised me to include my sponsors in the loop of discussion as well. By the end of that summer, I'd been able to come out to a lot of my closest friends and gain some momentum, but I knew that it'd be a significant next step for me to come out to my sponsors and eventually the climbing world at large. After a while, I told my friends at Arc'teryx, who I'm extremely grateful to be here with tonight, and they were 100% supportive. I told them about my eventual plans to come out publicly, but I still had no idea when I would actually do it. Mark and I were both in the fall that year, both in Yosemite that fall. Him for his usual El Cap aid route, and me to work on free climbing Golden Gate in a day with Emily here. He finished his route early and was ready to leave for Mexico, and Emily already had a partner lined up, and I really needed somebody to support me. And so I asked Mark to stick around for another day and support me on my first attempt. Even though we had sort of drifted apart in our Yosemite climbing at the time, Mark was still the best big wall partner I'd ever had. And he was the person I felt most confident and comfortable up there with. So it meant a lot to me that he was willing to stick around. And asking Mark me trying to free a route on El Cap today is no small thing either. He had to jug over 30 pitches and belay me for more than 22 hours straight, but I still tried to make it as fun for him as possible. Oh, boy. Our friend Max, who's running the camera, took that photo. It was Halloween. It was so we brought costumes and wore them on a ledge just a few hundred feet from the top, eating candy and watching Netflix on my phone while I rested below the last 2 crux pitches. So still trying to maintain a fun attitude. Yep, that was a good costume. When Mark got back from Mexico that year in 2021, he met up with me in Bishop and asked how my coming out plan was progressing. I told him that I had talked about it with my sponsors, but it was sort of on the back burner. He tried to impress upon me that I should do it, that it would be a great weight off my shoulders, and that it would set me free. I sort of agreed with him, but avoided the subject as I knew it was a lot easier said than done. However, a few days later, I decided I'd finally had enough and that I was going to do it on my birthday, May 2nd, which was only 10 days away. But let me rewind a little bit. This is a photo my friend Max took of me climbing Golden Gate in a day, which essentially capped the end of my climbing season in 2020, which is one of the best climbing years I've ever had. However, like I mentioned earlier, that's also when I realized that it didn't matter how big or how hard I went in my climbing because it didn't make me feel any different. Eventually, I started to understand Mark's original point and see how I could apply the lessons I had learned in my climbing to my personal life, and that started to give me confidence. I just had to learn how to bridge the gap. So that's why at the start of 2021, I decided to take a step back in my climbing and really focus on my personal life, making it my primary goal to come out by the end of that year. I had no idea how or when, but I eventually decided to do it on my birthday. I had to just pick a day, and then I took on a different kind of birthday challenge, in addition to also climbing a bunch of pitches in the Owens River Gorge like I usually would. By that point, climbing had taught me a lot about how to be bold and courageous, and Mark had taught me a lot about love and acceptance. I'd always wanted to be bold in my climbing, but I eventually realized that I needed to be bold in my personal life too, and that's why it was important for me to come out the way that I did. To truly accept myself once and for all, and to try to set an example for others in the climbing community as well, to celebrate our differences and not be afraid of who we are, regardless of sexual orientation. Thank you. I eventually did it by writing a post on Instagram, and in the moment I was extremely nervous. But after climbing in the gorge all day with my friend Peter, I felt like a new person, calm, relaxed, and confident. And until then, it felt like I'd gone through life wearing a 50-pound weight vest. But all of a sudden, climbing and life started to feel a lot easier, and I was able to enjoy both of them in ways that I didn't know was possible before. And so it's sort of funny. In the movie, way before it came out, I would say that I was teaching Mark about climbing and that he was teaching me about life. It was sort of a generic response because at the time we couldn't share all the details. There's a lot more going on behind the scenes. And I think that's a good reminder of how all great partnerships ultimately work both ways. I learned a lot from Mark and he learned a lot from me. In the beginning, we each brought something different to the table, and in the end, we each walked away as better people because of it. I love this photo. Oh boy. If anything, I hope our partnership shows all of you that climbing truly is for everyone. Partners can come in all different shapes, sizes, and heights, but that diversity ultimately makes us stronger because of the unique backgrounds and perspectives that we all bring to the table. So please, next time you guys go climbing with your partner, let them know how much you love and appreciate them, because climbing wouldn't be nearly as much fun without them. That's all I got. Thank you. Yeah.
Jordan Cannon, Jordan Cannon, Jordan Cannon, come on!
Thank you.
Thanks, dude. Good job. Thanks. Excellent. So, I'll be Mark. Okay, so, Jordan. Let's send it.
That looks
okay.
accurate.
So, Max and Mark in that early photo, I couldn't help but think of the Beatles. They look like the band The Monkees, like the hairdos and stuff, and like the turtlenecks, and it's like 40 years about, he's older than you. So I was curious on what other old dude things did you pick up? What quirky Mark habits? Anything?
Oh boy. My mom used to nap a lot when I was a kid, and I used to just not understand why. And Mark would also nap at the crag or like on the wall, and
he'd nap at the crux.
I'm still not quite there, but I think I'll appreciate the value of a good nap eventually in my life.
So you can recognize an important nap and then look towards the future for napping.
Yeah.
All right, I love that. And now with Mark, we were all up at Arc'teryx Academy in Squamish. It was great to be there on stage with you. It was like a dirtbag wedding. It was like hundreds of people celebrating. It was so much fun.
Tell them about our intro.
Oh, wait, okay, so the intro was, I was emceeing then as well, as I always do. I'll MC your life if you'd like. Just give me a call, I'll be there. Anyway, so I was like, okay, Jordan Cannon and Mark Hudon, and then Jordan comes strolling out with this huge, like, grade 6 haul bag, and lo and behold, where is Mark? But where he belongs, in the haul bag, getting hauled up.
Yeah.
And? Anything else?
No, not really.
Okay, good. I just wanted to cover that. But I had this opportunity to talk with Mark for a couple of hours at that bakery on Main Street there, just down from the venue. Mm-hmm. And he was telling me about his mentorship program. Mm-hmm. And so if you could and Mark can't be here, so if you could tell us about Mark and his mentorship. He's like an individual who's freely offering his time and talent and treasure even to help people understand this path of the big wall.
Yeah, that's a big topic that I think is really important, especially now that climbing's growing so quickly. I think a long time ago, to really get into climbing and to go far in climbing, you had to have a good mentor. But that's lacking for a lot of people, and that's why I've really, made a point of climbing with people like Mark. When I first started climbing with Mark, my friends that didn't know him, like, what are you doing climbing with this old guy? Yeah. And I was like, dude, it's Mark. He's rad. I'm gonna learn a lot, So I highly encourage other people to, pursue their mentors in the same way, but that's hard nowadays. And so, yeah, Mark has made himself available. I think he's pretty active on Mountain Project.
He's online. He's built a website to offer to people
he's
free of charge, bringing people into the Mark Hudon sphere to educate and give this really positive way forward.
He's a big educator in the big wall climbing space, particularly aid climbing and climbing El Cap. So if anybody's interested, hit him up on Mountain Project, or he's on Instagram now. He wasn't on Instagram before.
Even the old dog
pretty
can learn that new
responsive.
trick, right?
Yeah.
Get him on social media. Now all he does is he's on social media, he's on his phone, he's not climbing anymore. It's actually really sad. I'm just kidding, it's not. It's positive. But toggling back to you, so Gus Kenworthy, you're familiar with his name, Gus, Olympic skier. I know his father, Peter, from Telluride, and knew Gus when he was younger. Coming out, Megan Raponi, who's on the U.S. women's soccer team, coming out as well. And you as this professional climber coming out, it's unusual. So I'm curious as far as the mentorship side of that. Like people seeing, Gus or Megan and yourself, how has that changed your life?
Yeah, that played a big part into my decision-making with going more public in my professional life, I guess. I'd felt like I was basically there, having told a lot of my friends, and was pretty happy, but, I knew that I was in a good position to positively influence a lot of other people's lives. And so ultimately I came out for myself, but I also wanted to come out to be a good representative in the sport as well and give people somebody to look up to, because that does make a big difference, and something I lacked growing up. And yeah, so I feel honored to be able to give that to somebody.
And you've created, since we met in 2017, and here we are, flash forward 5 years, your platform has increased dramatically, right? And then you become this voice, and then a mentor for other individuals. So Nick Berry mentioned earlier his dihedral wall, like so close but didn't get to do it. Mark Hudon, 15 feet on the Teflon corner, these losses in life. And I'm just curious on your take on like getting so close, but then having it be enough, and how you describe that or use that in your life.
Oh, that's funny, because last spring I was actually trying to climb one of the routes that Nick talked about, Wet Lycra Nightmare. I have a photo of Nick in my van, climbing that route. I was climbing in 2017 the Westy Face just next to it, and saw them climbing on this epic roof and these crazy pitches, and it totally blew my mind. And so I was climbing it this spring and put a lot of effort into it, and basically had 3 attempts where I freed all but like one move on this 13A pitch in the sun at the top that I just couldn't get. And everybody was like, yeah, but as free as can be. And I was like, no. That
so
was
you're
then.
still working on it.
I'm still working on it.
Yeah.
That was then, this is now.
Life, the work in progress.
But, that it is an interesting game that we all play, and I like how Nick brought up the importance of the experience. There is a big part of me that's like, I had my experience. I had a great time. Is going back and free climbing this one dumb move like really going to change that experience a whole lot? Probably not, but...
And as Nick mentioned, so much of climbing is a very personal or selfish experience, and that you only remain on the summit for a short time, and then you go back to these communities, to these tribes, to these people with all of these lessons. Well, thank you, Jordan Cannon. Love you. Appreciate you being here, sharing your story.
Thanks, Tim.
Give it up for Jordan Cannon. Jordan Cannon, yeah! Yes! Thank you, Jordan. Thank you once again for Arc'teryx for bringing Jordan here and making this happen. Thank you to our friends at Sequoia Tioga for pouring those delicious beverages. Thank you also to the North Face, Cliff Bar, Patagonia, Royal Robins. And then tomorrow, Heather Sullivan, we're meeting right out here at 7:30. And we're going to breathe deep, stretch even deeper, and get things right. Thank you very much for being here with that. And then thank you guys. We'll see you tomorrow out on the mall. Grab those trash pickers, make it happen, and we'll see you back here tomorrow night. I'm Timmy O'Neill, signing off. Good night. Now the chairs. Okay, wait, before we go, we have to stack the chairs. Stacking the chairs. Ken Yeager, stacking the chairs, and then moving them to the side. We're parting the gray sea of chairs. Thanks, Kenny.